myself, and then we'll have a Q&A session of about 10 to 15 minutes where we'll start answering your question. I mean, we'll make our best to answer as many questions as possible, but we'll try to back with you if in case we won't be able to cover all of them. To ask question, please use the Q&A tab. We'll try to monitor the question as long as they come in. So feel free to ask any question while we have also the panel session, and we'll try to make sure to regroup them and answer them afterwards towards the end. Finally, this is more like a suggestion. So we won't use slide for this webinar. So this means that if you want to feel more engaged and look at all the speakers at the same time, you can click on the top right-hand side in the platform and choose the gallery mode. And this is, of course, just a suggestion, so feel free to use the platform as you wish. And finally, it would be amazing if you would like to introduce yourself, use the chat, share with us your name, the country where you're calling from or joining from, and finally, if you want, the company that you're working with. Also very important, if you want to promote this series or this webinar, please include the hashtag #DigitalCoffeeFuture. It will be amazing. And last but definitely not least, we want to thank our sponsor that just jumped in the initiative with us, eCrop Origin, and decided to get on board. So now I will stop sharing the screen. So you should be able to see us all. And I guess we can start with the first poll before we get into the conversation. So you'll have a chance to answer to one question, and then we'll get started. So please keep some time to answer. We'll wait a few more seconds, and then we'll close the pool. So, perfect. Okay, well, this is very interesting. So it's a nice way to start this webinar because many people ask, okay, what is the difference between digitalization and technology? Why did you choose digitalization for this webinar series? So I will say that, okay, you can still see the pool. Okay, sorry, apologize for that. So I will ask Sara to please also give an answer to this question, but somehow to set a bit the scene and tell what is the meaning of coffee digitalization after all. Yeah. So to you, Sara.
Thank you, Elisa. Thanks, everybody. Super excited to be on this webinar series. So first question, what is digitalization? I think in simple words, digitalization is performing activities in the digital space. And in order to do this, organizations and companies go through what we call the digital transformation, which is basically the act of shifting activities that were once performed offline to activities performed digitally. So an example, moving from letters to fax to emails to now mobile texting and so forth. So that's an example of how you move from an offline activity to an online activity. Now, in order for digital transformation to activate, you need 4 basic components. And unlike what is the expectations of most, digital transformation is not just building an app and a website. The most important component is the desire or the need to stop doing something offline and start doing it online. And there are different reasons: for efficiency, for convenience, for cost. And that desire or that needs is expressed through the people that we talk of in terms of users. So users have a desire and a need. And that's when technology comes into place. And because technology is the enabler for that desire and need to be fulfilled and for users to start performing activities online or digitally. So we can split technology into like two big buckets, right? And we can call it the front end and the back end, right? So the front end is the app or is the website that we're all very familiar with, right? So today I bought some coffee beans online, right? So I went on a website and I scrolled through the product listing. I chose a coffee bag, moved it from the product listing to the cart, and then I process the payment, right? So that is me shifting an activity that I would do offline in an online space through our website. So that's the front end technology. But you also have a back end technology that allows me to the activities on the front end to be executable. So an example, I bought coffee online, right? So for me to select a specific coffee and say, I want this coffee, the backend technology needs to have, for example, management, inventory management systems, right? So you have to make sure that whatever is displayed on the website, you know, it's linked up to some kind of inventory offline, so that eventually I will actually get my coffee bag delivered to my doorstep, right? Or another example is, yeah, I want to purchase something, but so I move my product from cart to checkout, but the backend technology needs some kind of integration, payment system integration, right? Something that actually allows money from my account to move out and go to somebody else's account. So backend and front end, and then users and all this to fulfill a specific desire, a specific need. Um, in the context of the coffee supply chain, we move a little bit from, you know, dealing with needs and desires from a consumer perspective, but needs and desires from a value chain perspective and value chain actors, right? So what is the need and desire of value chain actors in moving some of their activities offline to online, right? So what is that need and desire? And I think when it comes to the coffee supply chain, the need is really around information consumption, right? So we want to consume information around where the coffee, what kind of coffee where we are trading, where it comes from, who produces it, what was the price of that coffee, what kind of revenues were created from the sale of that coffee, how many intermediaries are involved in moving the coffee from the farm to a washing station, to a dry mill, to a port, and so forth. So there's a lot of information consumption that is required in this regard. But information consumption means that you know, where does this information comes from? And that's where, again, we're looking at sort of the back end. And here is the information is fed through data, right? Raw data. In order for any type of digital solution to feed and allow information to be consumed, data needs to come from somewhere, right? And needs to be fed through the back end so that eventually what it's produced on the front end is readable, consumable, digestible, understandable, whatever. So the question is, well, who provides that data? I mean, the data is fed, but who feeds the data? Who provides the data? And this is where a whole new, let's say, component of these four that I just mentioned comes to mind. And it's actors, right? It's people that are feeding the data or providing the data in order for the information consumption to happen. And who are these actors? They tend to be producer organizations or farmers or intermediaries in the supply chain that have the data and feed the data. So when it comes to the digitalization of the coffee supply chain, there you have five components, and there's an interesting relationship between, for example, users, the people consuming information in the front end, actors providing the data from the back end, and the value that is being created, right, from the provision of the data to, for example, how the information is then consumed by the user. And so it's an interesting relationship that we can explore further between users and actors who uses the information and who provides the data to do that. And then how is that value distributed, if at all, between the value chain actors? So this is why I guess digitalization of the coffee supply chain is more complex in a way than just thinking in terms of an e-commerce website, right? So I
Thank you,
think that
Sara.
that's a bit how I would sort of contextualize digitalization in the coffee supply chain.
Thank you so much for framing the whole concept for us. So going back to the pool, the initial question you had a chance to answer, we realized that digitalization is more like a process, and then we have somehow technology that is providing tools to make sure that digitalization can happen. And then we have also data. That is, of course, an important side and probably has a main role when we talk about coffee digitalization. So I think that in order also to go back to those actors that are very much connected to data and to everything that is connected with digitalization, I will want to ask you, Vera, I know you've been working quite closely with information and farm management. So could you please share your perspective on that and somehow connect those information with the concept coffee digitalization in that regard?
Thank you, Elisa. And also, again, very helpful to always hear the explanation of Sara and how she defines them in these different blocks. And one of the things that I was also thinking of is that when we discuss and talk about the different actors that are involved in this, it's also a piece where I wanted to bring to the conversation the academic field. Doing research and obtaining data has always been a key element in order to understand which elements or strategies are needed to overcome poverty, right? And mostly poverty can be found in rural communities where these agriculture products are cultivated. Hence the necessity of understanding these communities with their households and also these supply chains. Now, a lot of research has been done in coffee. It's an attractive product since it's consumed throughout the world, but the majority of the data comes from farmers and their families. And all the goal is for a greater good and it's used to define solutions, we often forget that this data can be used in multiple ways and especially by the farmer itself. And I think here technology could bring that bridge to this. So last year also while doing the cost of production study for Azahar, we researched actually around 100 producers in different regions in Colombia. And I was again reminded on how multifunctional this data is. And the intention was to have a better understand on the cost of producing coffee, the productivity, to see how the current prices were influencing the farmer's income. And it also evolved organically into having a better insight into the household spending by simply interacting with the producers. And we should always be very mindful of that multifunctionality piece. So what we did, we also decided to capture a bit more this information and to have a better understanding on the questions they were bringing to us, and we were trying to finding the answers with them. And it was great to see to have this natural conversation resulting in realizing them how their household spending was looking like, and also great to listen on the spot how they were actually among family members were talking how they could change certain things. One other key piece into this is was also actually for Azahar to also share the outcomes of these cost of production study with the producers itself. And we did a small little pilot with a group of around 20 producers. And they were actually very interested to hearing how they were actually doing on their costs and how they were actually managing their farm. They were actually at the end comparing themselves, their notes with the others and talking over their results and also going into depth on how they could actually change certain things. So I think there are different ways and how you can actually go about that. In one thing is obtaining the data and information. The other thing is also sharing it to them. So we are now actually in a process of really understanding how to put this data into a specific tool, which can actually provide direct feedback to the farmers. And for me, this whole piece of data, of information, has been an important piece throughout the work that I've been doing in coffee. But I think last year specifically for me, it really hit I would say an important piece within the conversation what we had at the Specialty Coffee Association when we're doing the work on the Price Crisis Response Initiative. And it was the topic of data and information was a topic that bubbled throughout the whole year. And I wanted to share this, how this was viewed by actually a person that's working even much more directly with producers, and is a representative of a producer organization in Mexico. And he was with us at one of the workshops, and he made really a remark that stuck with us. And he said, we have always shared information about producers and the way how we farm, the way how we process, everything what we do, because we really have nothing to hide. But we were always thinking that we sell coffee. And he said, and I slowly come to realize that we were not only selling coffee, we're also selling our work, our information, our data. And he was posing this question to the group, is, if they are receiving extra money for providing that information, how come we don't receive more value for it? It's our coffee, it's our data. Our data has a value. And I think this is a key piece in these conversations, especially when we're talking about the digitalization piece.
Thank you very much, Vera. So I think, so what you're saying is basically that somehow there is something that is a bit unbalanced right now. So we do have a lot of information, we have a lot of data that is being collected, but on the other side, it's also somehow difficult share this information back with the farmers that sometimes, or maybe all the time, are the ones that need the most this information. So I want to go to Ashlee and ask her, you're working very closely with farmers, and you have been seeing this very often in your career. I was wondering, could you share with us your experience regarding like data management in the field, like on the ground, and also maybe provide some examples of which are the tools that farmers use for their daily activities?
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. It's been really interesting hearing Sara and Vera, and we have a lot of concepts in common. So I think you'll hear me bringing together some of the points that have been brought up earlier. And I think as Vera pointed out, farmers are often data providers, and if anything, to Sara's point, I mean, they are the raw data in many cases. So they're really inputting, but they're not accessing it and directing it, or accessing information and benefits directly. It's very indirect. And so I've really been thinking about this using two different concepts, which is distribution and design. So from a distribution perspective, I'm really thinking about, what is the value of this data collection and sharing, and who benefits and how. I think it's a great potential framework for the community to consider when we're thinking about digitization and data. And really, 2 points kind of earlier mentioned, farmers aren't owning their own data. So before we even get to valuation, we need to really talk about ownership far beyond GDPRS, and really thinking about from a broader society and also coffee sector perspective, how are we going to develop a system to value that data? So ownership and value are tied together really closely. And then I think the third point, which Vera really clearly pointed out, was access. How are farmers accessing the information of the information that they give themselves, as well as other information such as price, etc. How do they really know what's going on in the supply chain? And then I think the other element besides distribution of benefits and access and ownership is design. To Sara's point earlier about end users and users that are providing inputs as well as outputs. Design of a lot of the technology has, and data processes and the digitization process in general has really been for and by downstream actors. And so when we're really talking about collecting information from farmers. As Vera said, it's not going back up to farmers, it's going very down. Either it's to traders, to roasters, to retailers, or to consumers. So we're not really including farmers. So it's a great opportunity. We have an awesome opportunity now to be thinking about farmers as users of data, as owners of data, to input it, and then also to receive it back. And we might want to think about how we improve these points in distribution and design within the framework of what is actually available to farmers. So what tools and technology do they use and do they have access to? And of course, I think we all know there's great variety around origins in terms of how farmers access phones and other types of communication, internet, etc. But by and large, most farmers aren't owning computers. A lot of them are also not owning and operating smartphones. There's a lot of feature phone use across origins. So I think we have really 3 or 4 main ways to communicate directly to farmers as users and as recipients of information. And using the feature phone, that would be SMS and IVR. IVR is interactive voice response. So this is often used for sharing information services about weather, price, logistics, education, and other kinds of best practices with mixed results. Depends on the purpose, and it should be well suited and tested with the farmer, but we definitely see them using SMS and IVR. We also see a lot of USSD functionality. So for those who aren't familiar, that's if you type in like a *3345# or hash. This allows farmers to, again, often find information services. Many companies use this as a way to share pricing information or other types of information and data, as well as accessing finance. So farmers may actually use their telecom provider in their phone at using a USSD code to take out a microloan on their own without any intermediaries. And then finally, we really see that in sub-Saharan Africa, at least, especially in East Africa, mobile money and using mobile wallets is utilized regularly by farmers. So these are 3, 4 different ideas on how we can immediately start designing to include farmers, which to some degree is being experimented on, but hasn't really been picked up in any mainstream fashion. And of course, if we have smartphones, we can always use apps, but to be frank, there is still very light usage of apps, even of smartphone owners. A lot may use WhatsApp. We hear about a lot of WhatsApp groups of exchanging information, but many might not read, might not write, might not know exactly how to access it, even if they have the smartphone. So just keep that in mind and really start by using and designing with your end users and include farmers in the thought process about who those users are.
Thank you so much, Ashlee. So, well, it's really interesting to actually see that, I mean, we have a lot of information, we're not sharing that back to farmers. On the other hand, we have most of the times very high-tech solutions that sometimes are not compatible with what farmers need. So there is somehow a gap there that we might need to fill. And this is an amazing opportunity to start doing that and thinking that a bit more on a broader level, so to say. It is also true, though, that digitalization is a process, and it's a process that can be owned by the different players that there are on the value chain. So it's not, it is definitely farmers at the very beginning, but we see digital tools also apply to all the other players, such as traders, exporters, roasters, and also information that somehow is shared with consumers. So Sara, like from your hand, you've been working very closely with roasters, but in general, like with many players in the value chain, and we're now moving towards this low-touch economy, where somehow we need to balance the demand from offline to online. So it will be interesting to know a bit like what's your perspective on that, how you think like all these players can play a role.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Elisa. So, I mean, yeah, it is a process. So you have digital transformation, so you're shifting activities from offline to online, and it comes from a desire or a need, right? So that can only happen when there's a certain number of people, the users, that decide, I no longer want to do this offline and I want to do this online. And I think that Ashlee provided some good examples of some digital solutions that were created in specific contexts, like, for example, East Africa around mobile payments, for example, right? People want to have access to their accounts, want to be able to withdraw cash and use cash and make payments, and they couldn't do it because there were no ATMs available. So, right, mobile payments was more advanced in countries like East Africa than it has been, for example, here in the Netherlands, where it really picked up in the last few years, because we were a cash-based economy, or a ATM card-based economy. So need and desire are always going to be the drivers. Then you have to figure out the technology that you have available and where you need to improve it in order to shift the experience from offline to online. And of course, we are living in very interesting times. I mean, COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown has provided us with lots of challenges, but also opportunities to rethink the role of digitalization in the coffee supply chain, but also when engaging with consumers, right? So we know, for example, that for the new circumstances today, coffee consumers want to drink coffee differently. They want to drink coffee. They're not going to stop drinking coffee, but they want to do it in a way that is more convenient. For example, I'm stuck at home, so I have to drink it at home. I want to do it in a way that is safe, right? So the idea of going to, after lockdown, in a crowded coffee shop on a Sunday morning is probably still not going to be appealing. So that's when online ordering and curbside deliveries and pickups are starting to come. So you see, roasters are responding to a new need from the consumer. Says, I want to experience coffee differently. So they go back to what they have and looking at their apps and the websites, the front end and the back end. And we started to realize that, for example, we are maybe not the most advanced sector when it comes to creating an online digital experience. We're not bad, but we're obviously not leading the pack. And so I think that there is an opportunity for roasters to explore how they can engage with consumers in the digital space in a new way. And obviously they're all confronted with the growing pains of adopting or using new technologies, whether it's making the website user experience or optimized user experience, that's the front end, or improving your inventory management and figuring out that you actually need somebody to manage inventories and payments on the back end, a function that most roasters don't have on staff today. So that's obviously for consumers and for fulfilling those needs. Again, when it comes to the supply chain, we already talked about information consumption, right? That is a need. We need information. We're consuming information. Why? Because roasters or importers, they figured out that they need this type of information for their own business model, right? Because they have their own users to needs to fulfill and accomplish, right? So that part, I think, we somehow addressed it already. But the other part is, well, what new opportunities do we have now that we didn't have before? So again, from maybe looking from a, the sort of from the consuming country perspective, so for roasters and importers, what are new needs or new desires that we may have moving forward? Well, I'm thinking, we especially the specialty coffee industry, right? Some concept of connection, direct trade, interaction, and all of these things used to be done mainly offline, meaning I get on a plane, travel to origin, collect data or extract data, whether it's with my iPads and Google surveys or my notebook. So I still extract data and I get that interaction with my supply chain partners. Now, maybe after we go out, we overcome COVID-19, some of that offline interaction obviously will come back, but maybe not in the same way that it used to be and not to the same frequency. So how do we create, for example, that level of connection and interconnectedness between value chain partners when you cannot do it offline and you can recreate an experience digitally? So that's an area where I think that we can definitely explore further.
Thank you so much, Sara. So I think that was super explanatory if you're talking about throughout the supply chains, which are the players. So I would say that we are just pausing for a second for another poll. We want you also to give your perspective on that. So let's have the second poll for this webinar.
I wanted to vote as well, but I see that I'm not able to vote. Host and panelists can't vote.
Okay. So, well, I see this quite interesting. I mean, I guess that definitely the message went through in terms of the opportunity of digitalizing the supply chain as a whole. So basically, as we see from numbers of different attendees, it feels like everyone will play a role in digitalization. This is very interesting. Also for the fact that we might need to think as much as possible how we can start integrating all this player in the process. So I guess this is a nice start for the following question, that is to Ashlee in terms of really understanding like what could be the efficiency of the solutions, and somehow do you feel that an integration could be possible and more beneficial for the different players involved?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think integration is already happening. I think that we're not there in terms of the end goal, but there is a vision to move in that direction. I see at least two different ways, which is probably far oversimplifying this, but system integration within a company and then system integration across the supply chain. And IDH works with specialty coffee players, but mostly with commercial and conventional coffee players, both exporters and traders, as well as roasters. And so when I'm thinking about integration within a company, I'm also thinking about the multinational context. And you'd be surprised. We really see fragmentation in terms of approaches of system integration across different players. So some really have very clean integrated systems, and some patch pieces together to become more efficient, to make sense of the information, and to communicate internally and with external partners. So I can't really highlight trends on integration necessarily, but certainly saying we have a lot of different models, and there is no one way that we see even the very large players that some might assume are very integrated, maybe aren't as much as you would expect. But there are some real pillars of great examples of integration. However, I think what's more interesting for the purpose of this call is actually system integration between companies and value chain players. And I was thinking of bringing up three here, and I'll start with service delivery. So when I'm thinking more in countries of origin and areas of production, really thinking about the relationship between exporters, service providers, potentially middlemen, farmer groups and cooperatives and other aggregators and farmers, we really do start seeing integration of digital tools, technology, and data sharing among these players that I just mentioned. And really that is enabling like everything from collection financing to fertilizer and other input distribution to aggregation and transportation and logistics between all of these partners. And I will highlight, I think there's a great opportunity here in access to finance. And I think that there are a lot of people that are really working on credit scoring and connecting farmer data outside of the supply chain of coffee and thinking about what other service providers are needed to unlock opportunities both for farmers as well as the rest of the supply chain. The second example is on traceability, and we could bundle that with transparency, but we'll just call it traceability for now. This is really, I think we're all familiar, but the purpose here is really farmer data management, ensuring that we have information about environmental and social data, and that we're able to connect where coffee is produced to where it's being sold and consumed. We really see integration here between exporters and roasters. And in some leading examples, we also see some connection to cooperatives, where farmer groups and cooperatives are actually accessing this information and inputting information here directly. So a little bit more integration. And then finally, to Sara's point, we really are seeing a connection to consumers in the digital space. We have blockchain and other consumer app approaches where we're trying to connect coffee production to coffee consumption. In some cases, we see this down to the farmer level where maybe prices are even verified through SMS and transactions are verified through SMS from farmers. And then that's connected all the way through traders, roasters to retail and consumers so that consumers can understand where their coffee comes from, what the pricing was, etc. So theoretically, from farmer to consumer, and I won't restate what I said earlier about integrating farmers as users to also own and access this information. But two examples to look into for the future of this work of really deep integration. One on the conventional side is Farmer Connect. It's one of many examples that's led by a host of roasters and other players. They are developing the commercial side of coffee blockchain experiences for consumers so that consumers can potentially tip a farmer or even provide extra cash for sustainability projects at origin. And then the second would be Trace with Fair Food. They work in coffee and in other supply chains, and that is more geared towards the specialty space. So we see varying degrees of integration, and it is exciting, and there's a lot of movement here.
Thank you so much. So I think that, I mean, we definitely gave like the bigger picture through how the supply chain, and somehow I was thinking it would be nice to maybe take a step back in a way and look at the more comprehensive aspect of the market. So I will ask Vera, you are working very closely with the specialty coffee market, which is of course like an important side of the coffee market as it is. So could we somehow reframe digitalization and try to better understand what could be the role of the specialty coffee sector there?
It's a great question. And I do think that the specialty coffee sector in itself has had has really achieved very much to differentiate the coffee they serve versus, if you want to say, conventional coffee. I think communicating in itself about what is being done or not done to even consumers is a very challenging piece to this. I think when it comes to the big roasters, the way how they communicate to consumers is very much different, of course, than the specialty coffee community, specialty coffee sector. What specialty coffee has done when it comes to communicating on what is actually coffee, how is it produced, where is it produced, they have done a great job in achieving that. But again, we're talking here about reaching at a certain level where nowadays it's sometimes even questions, okay, so what is really specialty again? You know, for some people there's so much information, or they do not know how to interpret the information that is provided. And I think that for in itself is already a challenge. Now add the component of just talking about sustainability issue, you open up another box about how can you can you communicate about that, and would then technology be a tool to enable it in a more easy way. And I do think that that I see very much a commitment also from the specialty coffee community that they want to have much more of a direct access to producers, as well as understanding better how it can be much more of a sustainable supply chain. And I think this is very much more of a positive trend. again, I would want to reemphasize that we mostly sometimes think about how can it serve a consumer, or how can it serve a roaster, or an exporter, or an importer. And I want to reemphasize again that we should very much think on how we can go from this type of communication towards that end, also going back to the producer and say, okay, this is what we gathered, this is the information that we have about you, about your farm, about your community. How do we give that back to them? And I'm not a technology expert by all means, I'm a development economist, but I do really much see already efforts of going towards that, to really wanting to use that information for them to take the decisions, not necessarily me or anybody else, but for them to see what they're actually in numbers, what they have on paper, and okay, what can I do now with this information? I think that's an important piece, because at the end of the day, it would not be for them and their information that we could not be communicating to the consumer. The producer should be, and the farmer should be at the end rewarded for their information. And if the market, if the specialty coffee market has found a way to market the coffee with this information, I'm sure there needs to be within this supply chain a way to reward back the producer of providing the information, and also incentivizing for them to keep the information also up to date. Because at the end of the day, it's for them a good thing. It can be a reward, but also a best practice for them to have that information updated.
Thank you so much, Vera, really. So I think it's interesting also to have a better perspective from the commercial side of the sector. Ashlee, you've been working very closely with them lately, so it will be probably the same question to you. How do you see the role there of the market?
Well, I actually, I would just like to talk about a little bit of the contrast between actually what Vera's saying for specialty versus commercial, because I think we see the trend that I commented on about integrating to consumer apps. Clearly, the commercial or conventional side is moving towards more direct communication and engagement with consumers. But one thing that's been very interesting for me to observe moving from specialty to conventional is seeing that, you know, the margins are much tighter for traders, maybe definitely for traders at origin. And there's not a lot of extra value that even the traders are receiving. I can't really comment on the larger roasters, but without valuing data and stories and having that consumer engagement, it is very difficult then to even think about how we transfer the value back to farmers if it's not being developed. So I want to tip my hat to specialty for creating the space to talk about quality and farmer stories and information, and how we bring data from the field to consumers to bring up the value of the product. I would also argue that all of coffee can benefit from that, and that conventional coffee is utilizing that. One thing that I have noticed is also on the conventional side, there is so much data that's being collected. There are so many systems, whether they're integrated or not, but the use of that data is still really wanting. So I think we see some really interesting initiatives from a lot of big players who are starting to really recognize they're sitting on so much information. And it might be used for traceability systems. It might be used for selling the coffee, but it's not necessarily applied for strategic and operational value, even if I'm just thinking about the private sector point. So I think that there are some really great opportunities on both ends of the spectrum to be thinking about how we utilize this data to be more strategic, effective, efficient, and move up operational excellence, and just to make sure that we're not forgetting about farmers, and that we can always be thinking about how, when we're collecting all this farmer data, what does that mean for us to think about different segments of farmers that we're working with? How does that help us think about how different farmers need different inputs, need different services, need to be engaged differently? How do we improve sourcing strategies and make them more efficient, and make teams that are working with farmers more efficient and with cooperatives? And I think there's a lot of other efficiency gains throughout the rest of the supply chain, but I do want to highlight a few of those. And also mention, of course, there's a lot of social and environmental insights through a lot of the data that we have. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of opportunity to really leverage this data for efficiency in our strategies and operational planning. And really be thinking about the social side, such as what is the living income gap in my supply chain in X country or across all countries that I source from? And how do I think about delivering services or higher prices, or switching to a higher quality product, et cetera, to the benefit of the entire supply chain and all parties involved.
Thank you so much. So I would say this is the perfect moment for the final poll, which is very much connected to what you just said. Let's see if we can engage again with the attendees. So it's into the market for the first answer. There is like a couple of probably words missing there, just so you know. A couple of more seconds. Well, definitely it seems like, yeah, there is a strong call to action in the industry to start seeing this as an opportunity to find new solutions in that regard. And I guess this is also a very nice chance to move towards the final part of the panel discussion, which I will ask Sara to please give her perspective, because I know we spoke about needs and challenges and also different tools, the different players that can be found through the supply chain. But at the end, what is really the silver lining here? What is the potential behind digitalizing the coffee value chain?
That's a really good point, Elisa. Thank you. And I would just like to build on what both Vera and Ashlee already mentioned. I mean, we can focus on the challenges and the things that haven't worked so far yet, or things that we could do better. I think that that's a better perspective. And I think Ashlee sort of pointed out that there are already few examples of where integration, for example, has proved and yielded results. Now, the question on data, raw data is just that, it's data. And without insights and without analyzing the data and providing insights, it's pretty useless. And there is a question on data extraction. We extract a lot of data, and then we don't know how much of that capabilities turns into producing insights that drive decision making, right? Whether it's at the consumer level, do I buy this or do I buy that, or among value chain actors, how do I, as Ashlee said, how do I make my sourcing more efficient and more cost effective, and so forth. The silver lining, I think, is that we've all, as I said before, we're moving to a low touch economy. We are looking for ways to engage either with consumers or with value chain actors on the digital space. So when before, I think digitalization was sort of a part of a project of the larger picture, I think digitalization now has the opportunity to become the front and center of initiatives, because the data needs to be collected efficiently. It has to be analyzed. It has to be turned into information and insights to make our supply chains work better, and at the same time drive consumer choices towards, for example, specialty, where we have more value distribution in the supply chain. So I think that's the opportunity that we have, and I think in a way this was sort of the silver lining in this in these new circumstances, and that's why, for example, you and I decided to talk about digitalization and make it into a topic, a standalone topic, rather than, oh, by the way, what about the digital solution as an after, as a side note. So I think that's already a big win for specialty, and I think, and hopefully for commercial too, in one way or another. And I think that we're going to be using digitalization to keep driving, you know, the outcomes that we want to see in the futures, which is better value distribution of resources and assets and information. I think that that's the silver lining, and hopefully in the next 2 webinars, you know, we'll, and possibly a third one, we will dive more into the specifics. I mean, today we just sort of started to peel the onion, but it's such a complex topic that it was good for us to sort of start here and then, you know, start unpacking it slowly in the next 2 seminars. So I really look forward to those 2, actually, to what follows us, basically.
Thank you, Sara. So yes, please follow us for the next few webinars. We'll try to dig deeper into the topic way more. So I guess we'll now have time to give some answers to some of the attendees' questions. And Vera, I think I have a question for you. I think from Nora, who says, how do you envision digitalization remaining as an opportunity for the most vulnerable in the supply chain rather than a new hurdle for farmers? Meaning in terms also of the cost that there is behind behind the old digitalization process, so to say.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I definitely think that the cost of using these tools, just to give it the name of tools, that give that extra value to the full supply chain and in some way captured, let's say at the end of a supply chain. I think if we all realize that it leads to that added value, wouldn't it be great if that cost of having those two is absorbed throughout the supply chain as well? I think at the end of the day, it's important to understand the work that is being done in order, one, to collect the data, then to process it into information, and then actually to able then to capture it. I think if we are able to, you know, I cannot use the word split, but if you were able to embed it in the cost of actually having coffee in that cup of coffee, I think that's a way that it should not be a burden, but rather also be a tool that the producer at the end receives. Should not forget, of course, everybody has costs, but at the end of the day, the farmers still have the majority of the risk that is not being covered by any insurance company in a sense. So I think the rest of the actors, we need to be very smart and think how that can be embedded.
Thank you so much. That's great. I think with this answer we actually answered more than one question. I hope so, at least.
Oh.
So I have another one that looks very interesting for me, and I'm happy for any one of you to answer. So someone is asking, is there significant value in open source data or information for the specific sector?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think for product builds and for data, so that we can all leverage that, have better insights instead of just using data and information as a reporting tool or a storytelling way. If we could share information that we all collect that's within our supply chains, outside of our supply chains, as well as the data and information that enables the technology and the tools to be developed, then that benefits everyone. And we do see that there are so many actors that are working here, both within coffee and outside, so many service providers, ag tech, ed tech, fintech providers that are getting involved and that we all work with, that it is a collective benefit to share information, to collaborate, to create open source tools and make data open source.
And maybe just to build on what Ashlee said, I mean, we are confronted with issues around how we collect the data, who benefit from it. And I think throughout the webinar, we made that, we discussed that issue at length. One of the, again, small silver linings is that we don't have a single institution owning all the data. That's not where we want to be, right? So the more shared, the more available in open source the data is, the better it is for everybody. What we want to avoid is a sector where there is data and therefore information monopoly, which of course in other sectors is more prevalent. So absolutely, data sharing is safeguards also, you know, and steers us away from sort of a monopoly approach, which would be extremely damaging for us, I think.
Agreed, and I can add, sorry, Vera, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ashlee.
Just very briefly, I think what is also helpful is aligning what types of data we all want to collect and what is valuable, and the variables, so that we can really leverage any data that is made publicly available. That was the point.
And it reminded me that that sharing that information, sharing data, can even be useful on many levels when we're talking about the supply chain. I'm referring back to the experience that I had last year, again, on after years doing not doing any research on cost of production and doing it again. It was beautiful to see how farmers actually were very open about their own data, that they said, okay, is it okay that we share your information among this group? And they were like, yeah, I don't have a problem with it at all. And then basically they were hearing the data of other producers, and they were sharing the notes and asking them, how do you harvest? How many do you harvest? All those questions that for them are very relevant. And so I do think that in hearing also about other data from maybe another community also helps them to continue that discussion. So by all means, I think in multiple fronts of the supply chain, we can share that even more.
Thank you. Extremely insightful from all of you. Really, it's really fascinating, actually, how much discussion we can have around digitalization. I think we have a final question that we might be able to answer in the last 2 minutes. And I think this is something that many also have been asking. So what about connectivity? Carolina is asking. I mean, this is definitely, she continues, it's an issue to face in a huge number of coffee areas. So yeah, whoever wants to take this.
I can only applaud how, for example, East Africa has been able to have so much access to applications and digitization. And it frustrates me to see, for example, here in Mexico, where, you know, literally not even standing on the roof of a house, I have connection. And I think many other countries still battle with that. By all means, let's welcome all the tech companies that can do something about this, because I do think that even social media apps where information is being distributed on, especially now, COVID information from certain institutions can help get, you know, actual good information to producers that are really right now without sometimes any signal.
Thank you. So I think, I mean, there are many questions here, and I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but I'm afraid we have to close. Looking at the question, I think I can be confident saying that we will answer many of these questions through the second session and third session that we'll have in the following weeks. So please feel free to join, and also if we're not answering those questions, I'm sure we'll be able to get back to you when the webinar series will end. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to the speakers for having this amazing discussion about coffee digitalization. I hope we were able to answer the question, what is coffee digitalization? And yes, we'll meet you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.